The second episode of Loki Season 2 largely focused on Obi trying to come up with a way to make the temporal loom properly process all the branching timelines into a physical thread. But for that, he needed to open the blast doors that he himself had closed to protect the TVA from the radiation emanating from the loom. And to do that, he needed the temporal aura of He Who Remains, who just happens to be very dead. Mobius and Loki managed to force X5 to reveal Sylvie's location. Before Loki and Sylvie could put aside their differences and learn more about why Loki saw Sylvie in the future, they learned that General Dox and her team of hunters were pruning timelines left, right, and center. Mobius, Loki, and Sylvie arrested her, but by then, the damage was already done. As the heroes, along with the rest of the TVA, were digesting this information, Casey revealed that he knew about Renslayer's current location. Renslayer lands in 1868 Chicago, where Miss Minutes says that she has to deliver the TVA handbook to a young Victor Timely. Apparently, that's what He Who Remains wants them to do because it'll start off the chain of events that will allow Timely to become the next Kong or He Who Remains. Back at the TVA, Obi points out that due to Dox's merciless pruning, the loom has stabilized. But that won't last for long because the branches are growing back. Beat 15, Casey, and the rest start to brainstorm ideas like finding Miss Minutes because she has administrative access to the TVA. They know that Miss Minutes is with Renslayer. So, if they find Renslayer, they find Miss Minutes, and then they bring her back to stop the temporal meltdown. Mobius and Loki follow the two time periods that are linked to Renslayer's tempad, 1868 and 1893. They fail to figure out why Renslayer was there in 1868, but we know she was there to make Victor Timely the man that he became in 1893. Without putting too much thought into it, Mobius and Loki walk into 1893, only to find themselves at the Chicago World's Fair. After some good old hands-on investigation, the duo finds Timely's show and heads over to that place. Miss Minutes and Renslayer are there as well. The moment when Mobius and Loki witness Timely for the first time and Loki points out that he's a variant of He Who Remains, ties back to the post-credits scene from Ant-Man and the Wasp, Quantumania. Timely gives a weird demonstration of the time loom, which is still in its prototype form. Soon after that, he is mobbed by Renslayer, potential buyers who want the loom, and TVA's dynamic duo. As soon as it is revealed that Timely isn't some genius but a swindler, Timely runs off, thereby forcing everyone to chase him. The chase to get to Victor Timely is interrupted by Sylvie. She has apparently used the tempad that belonged to He Who Remains to travel to 1893, and, as promised, she intends to kill Timely in every other variant of Kong that exists. Loki has to stop Sylvie from killing Timely because she is convinced that Timely is on his way to becoming the next He Who Remains. She thinks that the TVA has put Timely on this path because she doesn't know that Renslayer and Miss Minutes are the accused parties here, and they've done what they've done on He Who Remains orders. Yes, it's a very twisted situation. That's why Loki chooses to focus on the fact that they need Timely to stay alive and come to the TVA so that OB can use his temporal aura to fix the temporal loom. Sylvie doesn't listen to Loki and attacks him and Timely. This gives Timely a window of opportunity to run away with Renslayer and Miss Minutes. These two give Timely all the necessary information about what has happened to He Who Remains, the TVA, and more. Renslayer says that she wants Timely to come with her because she wants to stabilize the loom and save the TVA. Timely points out that Loki wants to do the same thing. Renslayer ignores Loki's character growth and chalks up his intention to protect Timely as an indicator of his constantly shifting allegiances. Timely believes in Renslayer, and they give everyone the slip and board a ferry. When it seems like Timely and Renslayer's relationship is about to become stronger, Miss Minutes convinces Timely that Renslayer was merely using him, and they drop her into the waters in just a rowboat, which won't be able to catch up with the ferry. Prior to Miss Minutes' betrayal, she was scoffing a lot at Renslayer every time she tried to make it seem like she was the only person that Timely should trust. Minutes also seemed flustered every time there was even a hint of chemistry between Renslayer and Timely. But Minutes makes it very clear that she is in love with He Who Remains. She says that He Who Remains gave her everything, except a physical body. Timely is evidently disturbed by the concept of an AI created by one of his variants imagining a romantic scenario with him, and he shuts her off. Renslayer gets to Timely's warehouse and also picks up a strange-looking device that seems like a prototype of the time stick that's used for pruning. As Renslayer reprimands Timely for his betrayal, Loki and Mobius barge in through the doors and try to convince Renslayer to lay down the crude time stick and let them take Timely to the TVA and stop the temporal loom from exploding. As things start to go sideways, Sylvie makes an explosive appearance too, and walks towards Timely to kill him. At the end of Loki Season 2, Episode 3, Timely reminds Sylvie that he isn't the genocidal maniac that she has faced in the past. Sylvie says that he is on his way to becoming one. Timely promises her that he won't become a version of He Who Remains. Something inside Sylvie clicks, and she lets Timely live. Loki and Mobius don't waste a single second. They dust themselves off and take Timely to the TVA. Sylvie pushes Miss Minutes and Renslayer into the Citadel at the end of time, and they arrive at the palace, which is crumbling and has a rotting corpse at its center. To pass the time and reignite Renslayer's motivation to get to Timely, Miss Minutes tells her that she is about to tell her a story that will infuriate her. In the 4th episode, Miss Minutes plays a flashback of the time when He Who Remains and Renslayer, working as a young hunter, stood at the window in the Citadel and vowed to be with each other till the end of eternity. When Renslayer asked He Who Remains to step through the time door and continue to rule over the TVA, he did the classic "I'll be right behind you" thing. As soon as Renslayer was gone, He Who Remains pulled up Miss Minutes and told her to erase everyone's memories. This comes as a shock to Renslayer because she realizes that her tenure at the TVA is longer than she thinks it is. By the way, now it makes sense why Renslayer couldn't remember what Sylvie's Nexus event was, because she was ripped out of her timeline. Renslayer wasn't being cocky and trying to rile up Sylvie at that moment. She genuinely couldn't remember her work as a hunter because she didn't have any memories of it. That said, Renslayer is hurt because she can't believe she worked for He Who Remains, thinking that she was his disciple, whereas in reality, she was his colleague. Miss Minutes senses Renslayer's anger and proposes the idea to discard He Who Remains, Victor Timely, or any other variant of his and just pave their own way to eternal glory. Back at the TVA, Timely roams around looking at the murals and artwork before getting hounded by B-15, Loki, Mobius, and Sylvie. They assure him that he's safe with them, but he needs to come with them to give his temporal aura to OB, thereby allowing him to fix the temporal loom. While Loki, Mobius, and Sylvie oversee that, B-15 has a conversation with Judge Gamble about the fate of Dox and her team. Gamble tells B-15 to go and convince Dox to focus on saving the TVA instead of simply pruning timelines. B-15 thinks that Dox is too much of a hardliner to listen to her words, but Gamble tells her to not worry about it and to focus on convincing Dox. Down at OB's office, OB gives a detailed explanation of what has to be done to fix the temporal loom. So, apart from the extractor, now there's a new device called the throughput multiplier, which has to be linked with the launcher. After launching, the multiplier will connect with the loom and increase its capacity to handle all the branches entering the loom. That's where Timely's little ticking device comes in, because, apparently, that's the only thing that'll make the throughput multiplier function properly. While OB, Casey, and Timely work on the multiplier, Mobius thinks that they should get some pie as they wait for the next step of their plan. This angers Sylvie very much because she thinks that Mobius is trivializing the issue, whereas the fact of the matter is that there's nothing else they can do, and getting angry isn't going to help. In the holding cell, Brad or X5 tries to rile up Dox and her army to begin a rebellion of some kind so that they don't die there. Dox reminds Brad about his betrayal and how he told Loki and Mobius about her plan to prune the branching timelines. Brad is left kind of speechless because he didn't expect her to figure that out so easily. B-15 interrupts this moment by entering the cell and asking Dox to come to terms with the fact that pruning isn't an option anymore, but saving the TVA and the timelines is still a priority. Just like B-15 predicted, Dox refuses to budge. B-15 exhibits hope, and she tells D-90 that they are going to see the correct path eventually. At the Pi Center, Sylvie and Loki have a huge argument about what they've done in the past, what they are doing in the present, and what they are about to do in the future. Based on that, Sylvie summarizes Loki's extremely optimistic vision for the future: Timely will save the TVA won't go back to its old ways, and Timely won't become a version of He Who Remains. In his defense, Loki says that these are the only options that they have. Sylvie still thinks that after getting a taste of everything that's synonymous with the TVA, there's no way that Timely will agree to go back to 1893 and continue to live his life. Loki says that they can view him from afar, nudge him in the right direction, and ensure that he doesn't do anything drastic. Sylvie says that that's something that a narcissistic god would say, and Loki aptly reminds her that they are gods. Back in the holding cell, Renslayer and Miss Minutes appear through a time door and ask Docs, Brad, and the rest to join and restore stability in the TVA instead of letting B-15 establish her new order. The prize for doing this mutiny is a regular life on the timeline. Since Brad is a greedy individual, he sides with Renslayer. However, Docs and the rest of her army refuse to side with Renslayer. And in a moment of pure horror, Renslayer puts them in that translucent box and squeezes them until they explode. It's not an R-rated horror show, that's why we don't see the aftermath of Renslayer's actions, but the sound of blood dripping through the floor paints a vivid picture. Oddly enough, this is followed by a scene where Timely asks for hot cocoa, and he is assisted to the vending machine by D-90. B-15 finds out what has happened in the holding cell, and when she tries to alarm everyone, it doesn't work because Miss Minutes is blocking all transmission. That allows Brad to sneak up on D-90 and prune him. He asks Timely about the little device that goes into the multiplier, but Timely doesn't give him a straight answer. OB figures out that Miss Minutes is in the building and messing with the temp pads and everything else that she can get her hands on. Mobius rushes to get to Timely, only to find nothing but a discarded time stick and spilled cocoa. He assumes that Renslayer has taken him back to his original timeline, while Loki assesses that they are still in the building because they need to fix the temporal loom. It turns out that Loki is right and Brad, Miss Minutes, and Renslayer are holding Timely hostage in the war room and trying to make him talk about the device that'll save the temporal loom. When Sylvie and Loki try to access the elevator and look for Timely, Miss Minutes uses the CCTV camera and the elevator to separate the two of them. Why is that a vital piece of information? Well, when Loki gets to the floor where the elevator has stopped, he sees a version of himself from the past standing in front of the elevator doors as Sylvie opens them. That answers the question of why Sylvie would come back to the TVA. It also answers the question of who pruned Loki in the first episode. It was a future version of himself. By the way, doesn't this mean that Loki hasn't been freed by time because he and everyone else are stuck in some kind of loop? Is everything a loop, or, as OB says, like a snake eating its tail? I don't know. Loki says that it'll all make sense, so I'll just take his word for it. With all that out of the way, Loki picks up the telephone near the elevator, and the caller turns out to be OB. Loki tells him that Miss Minutes is disallowing him and Sylvie from getting to Timely. OB says that he can reboot the whole system. That'll send Miss Minutes back to her factory settings and disconnect her from the TVA's system. When Loki and Sylvie learn that it'll also shut down the power dampeners that prevent them from performing magic in the TVA, they scream at OB to reboot it immediately. Miss Minutes goes out with an ominous message to Timely, where she basically says that he'll never be as great as he who remains. Sylvie and Loki overpower Brad. They prune Renslayer. Then they rush Timely to the temporal loom's control room. At the end of Loki Season 2, Episode 4, OB extracts Timely's temporal aura, and that finally opens up the blast doors. They see that the radiation emissions have worsened since Mobius walked out there. That means whoever goes out there to pull off the throughput maneuver won't have a lot of time because the suit will be incinerated. Loki decides to go out there because he's a god. However, Timely says that he should go because it's fitting. Maybe in the show's most unexpected moment so far, as soon as Timely walks through those blast doors, he disintegrates and turns into thin strands of matter. Of course, that renders everyone speechless, and they are left with no other option but to watch the time loom explode and engulf everything around them.